This episode is personal. About 40 years ago, when I was transitioning from the cloistered world of the Orthodox yeshiva to the university, I was sent to visit a leading rabbinic authority, a gadol hador, if you will. And he was supposed to give me advice. It turned out that this great rabbi refused to speak to me since I was, at that moment, in twilight time. Ben hashmashot is what he told me. Stay tuned to the end of the episode to hear the details of this encounter, but it was at that moment that I fell in love with this idea of Ben Hashmashot, twilight, as more than just a moment in our daily clockwork. Welcome to Madlik. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on your favorite podcast platform and now on YouTube and Substack. We also publish a source sheet on Sfaria, and a link is included in the show notes. If you like what you hear, feel free to give us a few stars and a nice review. This week's Parsha is Bahalotcha. The Israelites celebrate their first Passover, we are told, at twilight. One cannot help but acknowledge that a lot of Jewish ritual is dependent on time, or to use the Talmudic phrase, to liot bizman. Watching Shabbat and holiday observance, one could be forgiven with the thought that Judaism has a fixation on the liminal moments of twilight and to a lesser extent dawn. We will explore this fascination with twilight as an embrace of the ambiguity and disorientation experienced during this daily transition. So, welcome to the Twilight Zone, Rabbi.
Okay, I'm looking forward. This is a great topic.
I don't know how we get these topics, but we stumble into them and we have some fun.
They're amazing.
We have some fun. So, most people, I think, if you ask them about twilight time, outside of the context of a particular few minutes of shkia or one of these technical terms that are used for the setting of the sun and the onset of the Sabbath or the coming out of the stars and the end of the Sabbath, they might refer to a Mishna in Pirkei Avot. And there it says in Pirkei Avot 5:6, it says 10 things were created on the eve of the Sabbath at twilight. Erev Shabbat ben hashmashot, that's the word used in Mishnaic Hebrew, and these are they: the mouth of the earth, which swallowed up Korach, the mouth of the well, the mouth of the donkey, the rainbow, the manna, all of the 10, I would say, miracles that occurred in the Bible. And I have always, Rabbi, taken this to mean that the rabbis didn't feel comfortable with miracles. So they said, it must be written into the code. It must be coded into the software of the universe. And that was done on this twilight time. But frankly, I think, and today I'm going to argue, that it goes more than just having a problem with miracles. The twilight time was the place of safek. It was the place of uncertainty. And that crossed over the uncertainty that comes with not knowing what's ahead to the uncertainty of philosophical arguments, uncertainty in regarding philosophy and theology, uncertainty about halakha. And we are going to see that if there was one moment of the day associated with safek, which is the Hebrew word for uncertainty, it is twilight. So let us dive right into the parsha of that it is mentioned in the biblical Hebrew. And it says, God spoke in Numbers 9, 1-3, to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai on the first new moon of the second year following the Exodus from the land of Egypt. So already there is a fixation, Rabbi, in Judaism on time.
Right.
It's the new moon. It's the second year. We are very calendar-oriented, and I would say time-oriented. Let the Israelite people offer the Passover sacrifice at its set time. You shall offer it on the 14th day of this month at twilight, ben ha'arbayim, at its set time you shall offer it in accordance with all of its rules and rites. So again, Rabbi, you can't help but notice that when we are talking about mishpat and laws and rules, there are a lot of laws and rules in Judaism that have to do with dates and with times. You just can't get away from it.
So let's look at the term Bein Ha'arbayim, because the word Arbayim is a familiar word. That's the word Erev, meaning evening. So Bein Ha'arbayim means between the evenings, which they translate as being twilight.
And I said in the intro that we had a fixation on twilight. And Rabbi, really, I think twilight can be in the morning and at night. It's both dusk and sunrise. It's that moment where I think that you get a transition from day to night. But I think you are right. In the biblical Hebrew, it comes across more for the twilight that we get at sunset.
And that's why the rabbinic Hebrew uses Bein Hashmashot from the word shemesh, because the word Bein Hashmashot is equally applies to the morning and the evening, while Bein Harbayim really only applies to the evening.
I absolutely agree. I love it. And the only thing that I would add in thinking about this is maybe the reason where both the biblical Hebrew word focuses more on sunset and our tradition focuses more on the importance of sunset is actually we start and end the day at sunset. The morning dawn might have impact on when you can start to pray, when you can put on your tzitziot, things like that. But at the end of the day, or the beginning of the day, I should say, it begins at sunset. So it is only natural that we Jews should be focused more on twilight because it's the beginning of our day. Midnight has no occurrence for us. The calendar doesn't change when the clock strikes 12. It changes when the sun sets. And I don't know how many cultures and traditions and religions are like that, but certainly in Judaism, that already adds to the baggage inherent in twilight and sunset.
Right. Now, Islam also works, days from the evening. I just wonder whether they also have a category called Bein Hashmashot. That would be interesting comparative religion someday.
Yeah, absolutely. And those listeners who know a lot about Islam, send us a note, put a note on Substack. Let us start a discussion. In any case, this is not the first time that Passover is associated with being done at twilight. I think that's kind of unique also. Whereas Shabbat, you kind of wait for twilight transition to be over, and then you know it's Shabbat. Here somehow, even in Exodus 22:6, it says, you shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of this month, talking about the Paschal Lamb, and all the assembled congregation of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight, ben ha'arbayim. And here is where in Targum Onkelos, the Aramaic translation, here he translates it as ben shimshiyah, ben hashmashot. So we do get these two terms that you referenced before are identical, slightly different nuances, but they are certainly identical to what that rabbi told me when he wouldn't speak to me. It was ben hashmashot. It's universally understood as it's that transition time. Now, Ibn Ezra, on his commentary on that Exodus verse, says, Ben ha'arbayim is a difficult phrase. He quotes Rashi, who actually starts thinking in terms of the midday sun. We've mentioned this before, Rabbi. The Jewish or the Halakhic hour is not 60 minutes. The day is divided up into 12 equal parts. So in the summer, the hours are longer. In the winter, they're shorter. And Rashi somehow believes that once you get into the second half, the second half of the game, so to speak, of the day, already you're starting to talk about twilight. Ibn Ezra, and I would argue most of Jewish tradition, does not agree. And what Ibn Ezra says, that there is no question that we are talking at dusk. You shall eat the flesh of the Passover sacrifice. And he is talking that it is when the sun starts to go down on the horizon. That, he says, is the first part of dusk. And the second is when the sun is no longer visible, but there is that ambient light. And those are the two parts of twilight. Not the first time that the Ibn Ezra quotes the Sadducees, the Tzaddukim, who say that they divide the evening dusk into three parts. So, of course, the idea is it was so important to Judaism that it was kind of like an Eskimo giving different words for snow. We started to parse up, slice and dice what the dusk was, and that there were disagreements between different factions. I just find that kind of fascinating.
Yeah, so let's just explain it. The two parts of this dusk. One is when the sun's on the horizon, that's before sunset. When the sun, but after sunset, where it's still light, and we all know that, right? For a while after sunset, it's still light. That's the second half. So actually, the two parts of this dusk period are divided by sunset. They're the two sides of sunset.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a magic to it. There's a magic to when that sun goes down below the horizon and there's still light. There's magic in the morning when you don't see the sun yet, but there is an aura. I would think in many, many religions and cultures, there is this idea of this beauty of the twilight moment. But I made an argument in the beginning that for our rabbis, there was certainly an issue, an association between twilight and safek, and uncertainty. And if we go to the Talmud in Shabbat 34b, it says that sages taught in a Braita, which is like a Mishna, which discusses the range of problems that arise with regard to the twilight period. Twilight is a period of uncertainty. Ben hashmashot safek. And it's uncertainty whether it is day and night, or is it completely day, and is uncertainty whether it's completely night. And that is the first moment. They don't know whether it's day, and they don't know whether it's night. And besides this Passover law, Rabbi, which is kind of fascinating to me, and maybe we won't touch upon, there's really nothing that is done during twilight. It's things are done at day and things are done at night. And you're kind of waiting for the end of Shabbat, or you're waiting for the sun to set and the beginning of Shabbat.
Well, actually, but that period, what you call that liminal space, that's the reason we have 25 hours of Shabbat, because we're strict at the beginning and we're strict at the end. That period on Friday between sunset and nightfall, since it's a safek, since it's an uncertainty, we consider it as Shabbat. And on Saturday night, we also consider it as Shabbat.
And I think that fits right in with where the rabbis go now. And it says, therefore, the sages impose the stringency of both days upon it. So if we're talking about, I don't know, as you say, Shabbat, or it's a fast day of Yom Kippur.
So I want to tell you, so let me give you the example. This year, this summer, Tisha B'Av, the fast of Tisha B'Av is Saturday night and Sunday. Yom Kippur can never fall out on a Friday or Sunday. We protect Shabbat. Yom Kippur, the calendar is rigged in a way that Yom Kippur never falls out on Friday or Sunday. But Tisha B'Av can fall out on Sunday. So that liminal space, Jeffrey, between sunset and nightfall is a weird space. It's both Shabbat, that you can't violate Shabbat, but you're not allowed to eat during that period because it might also be Tisha B'Av. So it has, like the Gemara says, it has the chumrot, the stringencies of both days.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I have a memory also going back to the yeshiva of there's a tradition that you have 3 meals on Shabbat. And the third meal is called Shalosh. And I have memories of sitting in the yeshiva in a classroom, and you've been eating all day, so basically you want to break bread, and you might even use matzah during the year just to have two chalot, so to speak. And you start singing, and then the light outside starts to go down. But in researching tonight, I saw a ruling that says that you're not allowed to eat before Havdalah. And so, therefore, some of the legal authorities say you can't stretch your third meal too far, because if it gets into that twilight zone, you might be eating on the end of Shabbat. And I definitely, and this is God bless the Hasidim, there were times where they break the rules because they felt very strongly that the twilight time was so magical, so spiritually powerful, that it would stretch on, and you would be singing, and it was powerful. And we're going to get a little sense of that in another tradition, hopefully later, where there is this sense of the forbidden. As you say, sometimes you want to be more stringent, but sometimes you can't be stringent. Let's finish the rabbis, because this becomes kind of interesting about how you measure the twilight. It says the definition of twilight is uncertain. And what is twilight? From when the sun sets, as long as the eastern face of the sky is reddened by the light of the sun. If the lower segment of the sky has lost its color, the upper segment has not lost its color. That is the twilight period. And it goes on, and then it does something fascinating. The rabbis try to define the length of time of twilight. Rabbi Nehemiah says the duration of the twilight period is the time it takes for a person to walk half a mil after the sun sets. Rabbi Yossi says twilight does not last for a quantifiable period of time. Rather, it is like the blink of an eye, kecheref ayin. This night enters and that day leaves, and it is impossible to calculate it due to its brevity. So I love the fact that they're measuring things in stuff that transcends time and space, assuming that it takes you and I about the same time to walk half a mil as it did 2,000 years ago. We can get a sense of time. We can calibrate our watches. So it's linked to human activity of walking. And then the other, kecheref ayin, the blink of an eye, is a Talmudic phrase that is just so special, meaning something can come instantly. I love all of the words that are so descriptive and have such kind of feeling about them.
That's great. Well, horrified is a great word, but Jeffrey, of course, that different people wait a different amount of time after sunset on Saturday night to end Shabbos. I'm sure in the yeshiva, they waited a long time after sunset. The modern Orthodox wait a shorter time. And you know what that's based on? It's exactly what you said. It talks about how long it takes to walk a mil, how long it takes to walk this length of distance. And that, of course, depends on the person. And there's a huge debate about how long it takes to walk. And therefore, there's a debate about when Shabbos is over.
So I didn't tell you, Rabbi, but we had the week off last week, and I decided to rebroadcast an earlier episode that we did called Rashi, Women and Wine. And in it, I talked about Rashi's daughters and the fact that they all married the Tosafot, who argued with Rashi. And I believe what you were referring to is some people follow Rashi's determination of when Shabbat begins and when it's out, and some people follow the Rabbeinu Tam. And so here, this is a segue from
Rashi's grandson.
Rashi's grandson. Yes, absolutely. So yes, these have strong impacts. I will say, besides the stringencies, when things are, for instance, forbidden only from the rabbis, midrabanan, then we permit them on Bein Hashmashot. You can do things that maybe the rabbis would say you can't do on Shabbat, but you can do them on this twilight moment. And I wanted to come back to this question of safek, of things that are unsure, which is a very strong concept in the Talmud. There's even a phrase called svek sveka, where you have the translation is a compound uncertainty, where, to put it into the language that we're talking now, you don't know whether it's the sun has set yet, and you don't know whether it's Friday. So now you're talking about one suffix on top of another suffix. The rabbis literally thrived on questions of uncertainty. And I think part of it had to do was this transcends the calendar. It talks to the fact that we start every day with a moment of gray, a moment that's neither here nor there. I think it had to have an effect. And if we're talking practical halakha, you talked about Tisha B'Av. I will quote from our favorite mohel, Cantor Philip Sherman Zichrona Livracha, who talks about a baby born on Monday will have his bris the following Monday, 8 days later. A baby born on Monday after it's dark will have his bris the following Tuesday. No big deal. You know, because it's a safek of whether it's the 8th day or the 9th day, you push it out. A baby born Friday evening after sunset, but before it's dark, is called a twilight baby. I had never heard that phrase before.
Jeffrey, only Cantor Philip Sherman used that phrase, but it's a good phrase.
So he made it up, but I think it fits. And there is a perfect example of when, because of the doubt, we leave something, we don't do something. There is a wonderful tradition, since we started talking about Twilight and Pesach, of making matzah after the time on Erev Pesach that you're no longer allowed to eat chametz, you're no longer allowed to own chametz, you're certainly not allowed to do anything with it. So that is the elongated twilight, if you will. And there's a mitzvah to make the matzah at that moment that you will use at the Seder. And I think, Rabbi, it's kind of like walking on the wild side. There is this sense of the uncertainty of the twilight period, the uncertain period that adds to its holiness, that adds to its mystery, that adds to its magic. I think it's certainly something there.
There's no question about it. I mean, mystery is a good term. This Bein Hashmashot is a mysterious period. That actually, Jeffrey, goes back to the first source you quoted. The things that are mysterious, like the earth that opened up to devour Korach, all the things that don't make sense in nature, they're mystery. They're created in this mysterious time.
I think that's the new read that we have on that Pirkei Avot. And that's what I was trying to say, but you formulated it much better. I always thought that was coming out against miracles. In fact, what it's doing is celebrating the mysteries, the things that we don't understand, and celebrating them, truly celebrating them, and making them special. There is no question. Now, we talked about the fact that the emphasis is clearly on the evening, the Ben Ha'arbayim, but dawn also has its moment. And I'm going to quote from a rabbi who has a website for people whose either gender is not totally defined or post-gender, and he has an article called The Holiness of Twilight by Ruben Zellman. He's clearly a scholar. Let me read a little bit of it. He says, in Halacha, there is no morning. There is Alot HaShachar, rising of the sun, the point at which the sunlight peaks on the horizon. There's Netzach Hama, peaking of the heat, the moment when the top of the sun can be seen. And Mishek Yakar, from when he will recognize, the moment when a person can recognize someone else. I always love that part of the morning. When do you know it's morning? When you can recognize another human being. And it says specifically not their closest friend, at a distance of a few feet. These distinctions, he continues, are incredible and precious. To collapse them into the binary of day and night misses the juiciness and the beauty of the spaces in between, and the specificity that they each carry. The same is true for evening, which famously includes Bein Hashmashot, twilight, a period of time that sits between 2 days as both and neither, and has been carved out as a holy liminal, in-between place for Rabbi Reuben Zalman's teaching and the Twilight people's prayer. So he quotes a bunch of stuff, and then he actually taught me something, Rabbi. There is in Mishna Avot a saying that says, Rabbi Shimon said, be careful with the reading of Shema and the prayer. And when you pray, do not make your prayer something automatic. Al ta'aseh tfilatcha keva. And I always thought that meant don't do it by right. Make every prayer as if you've never prayed before. But he quotes, this rabbi quotes from the Talmud in Shabbat 35b, and it brings the opinion. He says, with regard to this keva, Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, Rabbi Yochanan said, it is a mitzvah to pray with the reddening of the sun. Rabbi Ezra said, what is the verse that alludes to this? Let them fear you with the sun and before the moon, generations after generations. So he translates keva, Rabbi, to mean when it's 100% day, or when it's 100% night, and when
no uncertainty.
No uncertainty. He says the only time to pray is when it is transient. And what does that transience of twilight bring? In this regard, it brings fear of God. And you can say fear means trembling. You can also fear is what you were talking about before, the mystery, the awe of the divine. But he takes this to mean don't pray in the middle of the day, don't pray in the middle of the morning or the evening. Get up and pray at dawn and say Ma'ariv at twilight. I just love that.
That's great. That's amazing.
And I had never even thought about that, but this is a bona fide translation, or I should say interpretation from the Talmud.
Yeah, I think it's not a translation, it's an interpretation.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think keva, once you hear it, it makes you think. It definitely makes you think. So I didn't want to, the Talmud in Shabbat continues with its discussions. And since there are so many people who say, when is Shabbat over? When you see 3 stars? I thought I would also quote that. So we just put that in our little toolbox. On Shabbat 35b, where the conversation continues, it says, with regard to the period of twilight, Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said, when one can see 1 star in the evening sky, it is still day. 2 stars, twilight. 3 stars, night. And then they describe how big the stars are, so forth and so on. But that's where that tradition comes from, of doing the stars. Interesting, he has 3 gradations here, similar to the Karaites and what we were talking about before. So I think that if there's any real takeaway that I wanted to leave everyone with is if you look up Twilight in Wikipedia, for instance, you'll see the Christian practice of vigil, which gets held at a few times in the dark. In Islam, as you said, Rabbi, it might be the start of the day. But I think only in Judaism is this liminal moment. The word liminal comes from threshold, a doorway, a moment of passing. It's this analogy, the quality of ambiguity or disorientation that occurs in the middle stage of a rite of passage. And I think that's what I took away, and it fits into our Parsha in terms of the Passover Seder. You're going through a rite of passage. The doorpost, that liminal thing, has the blood on it. I really do think that for the rabbis, it was this belief in safek, in uncertainty, the awe that uncertainty brings, experience that was a profound tool for both feeling that which is transcendent, but also embracing uncertainty. And I just love it. Wanted to hear your comments, and then I am going to finish with my story of the yeshiva.
Finish with your story. Take it away.
So anyway, I studied in the yeshiva with Rav Shlomo Wolbe, who was considered in his own way one of the great Muslimniks. But when I told him that I had applied and been accepted into Columbia University, he gave me an envelope and he said, "You need to visit Rav Yitzchak Hutner." So I went to Brooklyn High in Berlin, and Rav Hutner's office had a door that had one of these buzzers on it. And I was told before I went in that when you leave, do not show your back to Rabbi Hutner. Walk out backwards, because if you turn your back to him, he's not going to buzz you out. So I knew that I was dealing with somebody who had gravitas. So I went to him. I gave him the envelope. If there was anyone listening who has the archives of Rabbi Hutner and can find that letter, I'd love to know what Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe wrote. My sense is he wrote, "Rabbi Hutner, you're our last chance for saving this kid's soul. You got to save him." And I can tell you, Rabbi Hutner did not bite the bait. He looked at me and he said, as I said in the intro, "You are Bein Hashmashot. You are in the Twilight Zone. When you go to Columbia, you can come back and then I will talk to you." So I went to Columbia and I went to talk to him, and he still would not talk to me. So, Rabbi, you know what I'm taking from that? I am taking from that, I got a blessing from Rav Hutner that I am to live in the Twilight Zone. In that that magical moment of Ben Hashmashot, I am still here, still thriving, and I take that not as him turning me away, but as him recognizing me for the path, the unique path that I was following.
That's a fantastic story. Okay. Please God for many more years to come. Thank you so much, everybody. Great topic, Bein Hashmashot. Enjoy Bein Ha'arbayim, the discussion of the Pesach Sheni, and Shabbat Shalom. We will see you all next week.
Shabbat Shalom.